Venezuela, on South America's northern coast, is a land of natural beauty and vast oil reserves, the largest proven crude oil reserves in the world. For decades, oil wealth made Venezuela one of Latin America's most prosperous nations, funding cities, infrastructure, and social programs. The country's economy and government became entirely dependent on oil, with fortunes rising and falling alongside global prices. State-owned PDVSA controlled the industry, making oil the core of both economic and political power. But years of mismanagement and political turmoil have left the oil sector in decline. Production has plummeted, and the infrastructure is crumbling. Despite its vast reserves, Venezuela now struggles to extract and sell oil efficiently. This decline triggered a deep economic crisis, devastating millions of Venezuelans with shortages of food, medicine, and basic necessities. Oil remains the government's main source of foreign currency and its economic lifeline. President Nicolas Maduro's grip on power depends on controlling oil exports. Any threat to this flow is a direct challenge to the government's survival. The stakes are high. Disrupting oil exports could reshape Venezuela's future. The country's reliance on oil has made it vulnerable to both market swings and international pressure. As the crisis deepens, the world watches to see if Venezuela can break free from this cycle. The next chapter in Venezuela's story will be written by what happens to its oil. The fate of millions hangs in the balance. Tensions between the U.S. and Venezuela escalated after Nicolas Maduro took power in 2013. The U.S. accused Maduro's government of corruption and human rights abuses, refusing to recognize his presidency. In response, the U.S. imposed sanctions, economic tools meant to force change. The toughest sanctions hit in 2019, targeting Venezuela's oil industry and cutting off its main source of income. American companies were banned from dealing with PDVSA, and foreign firms faced penalties for helping Venezuela sell oil. This made it nearly impossible for Venezuela to find buyers or get paid for its oil. The Maduro government turned to China, Russia, and Cuba, who defied U.S. sanctions. For ordinary Venezuelans, the sanctions deepened an already severe crisis. The U.S. claims the sanctions target the regime, not the people, blaming government corruption for the suffering. Critics argue the sanctions have worsened shortages of food, medicine, and essentials. The result? A humanitarian disaster, with over 7 million Venezuelans fleeing the country. Sanctions have become a central battleground in Venezuela's crisis. The struggle over oil revenue is a fight for the country's future. The world is watching to see if pressure will bring change or more hardship. In December 2025, the U.S. military seized the oil tanker Skipper off Venezuela's coast, a dramatic escalation. For the first time, the U.S. moved from financial sanctions to physically intercepting a Venezuelan oil shipment. The Skipper, loaded with nearly 2 million barrels of crude, was bound for Cuba. Instead, the U.S. redirected it to an American port, aiming to forfeit the cargo. This was no isolated incident. It was the result of months of planning by U.S. authorities. The Skipper was just the first on a list of targeted tankers. The U.S. signaled a new phase, not just discouraging buyers, but physically stopping oil from reaching its destination. This shift moves the conflict from finance to military enforcement. The U.S. naval presence in the Caribbean is now the largest since the Cuban Missile Crisis. The message is clear. The U.S. is willing to use force to enforce sanctions. This action raises the stakes for everyone involved in Venezuelan oil. The world is watching to see how far the U.S. will go. The rules of the game have changed. The Skipper's seizure is part of a broader U.S. crackdown on the shadow fleet, aging tankers moving oil from sanctioned countries like Venezuela, Iran, and Russia. These ships use tactics like turning off tracking signals and falsifying documents to evade detection. The shadow fleet is a lifeline for sanctioned nations, with China as a major buyer. The U.S. now aims to disrupt this network by physically targeting the ships themselves. Previous threats of sanctions weren't enough. Now, military and legal power are in play. The U.S. has a list of tankers under surveillance, warning the entire shadow fleet that the risks have skyrocketed. Increased U.S. naval operations in the Caribbean serve a dual purpose, targeting both drug traffickers and oil smugglers. The same ships used to fight narco-trafficking are now intercepting oil tankers. This aggressive approach marks a major shift in U.S. sanctions enforcement. The shadow fleet's days of easy evasion may be numbered. The global oil trade is entering a new era of risk. The skipper's seizure sent shockwaves through the global oil and shipping industries. Suddenly, transporting Venezuelan oil became far more dangerous. Shipowners and traders are now wary of losing multi-million-dollar vessels to U.S. intervention. At least one major shipper immediately suspended plans to move millions of barrels of Venezuelan crude. This hesitation could sharply reduce Venezuela's oil exports, its main source of revenue. Without oil money, the Maduro government faces a financial crisis, unable to pay workers, import goods, or fund the military. The U.S. is betting that this pressure will force change in Venezuela. Buyers of Venezuelan oil must now weigh the risk of U.S. seizure against potential profits. Insurance and shipping costs are rising, and some may abandon the trade altogether. Venezuela could be forced to offer even steeper discounts, shrinking its profits further. The impact of a single seizure is rippling through the entire supply chain. The oil market is on edge, bracing for more disruption. The stakes for Venezuela's economy have never been higher. Venezuela's government reacted with outrage, calling the skipper's seizure piracy and theft. Officials denounced the U.S. action as illegal and a violation of national sovereignty. Maduro's government vowed to fight back through diplomatic and legal channels, appealing to the United Nations. The incident was used to rally nationalist sentiment and blame foreign aggression for Venezuela's woes. PDVSA, the state oil company, remained silent, highlighting the uncertainty and fear within the industry. Maduro has long blamed a U.S.-led economic war for Venezuela's crisis. The skipper's seizure gives him a powerful symbol to support that claim. By framing the U.S. as a colonial aggressor, Maduro seeks sympathy abroad and unity at home. The narrative of victimhood is now central to Venezuela's response. The U.S. move drew sharp criticism from Venezuela's allies. Russia's President Putin called Maduro to offer support, condemning the U.S. action as overreach. Latin American leaders like Brazil's Lula and Colombia's Petro warned that U.S. military moves could destabilize the region. They fear a dangerous precedent. Today Venezuela, tomorrow another nation. The U.S. and its allies defend the seizure as necessary to enforce international law and fight corruption. Opponents argue it violates sovereignty and should be resolved through diplomacy, not force. The world is split. Some see the U.S. as a global policeman, others as a necessary enforcer. The crisis has become a proxy for larger geopolitical struggles. The stakes now extend far beyond Venezuela. The tanker seizure has sparked fierce debate in Washington. Lawmakers from both parties warn that military enforcement of sanctions risks a wider conflict. A bipartisan group filed a war powers resolution to limit the president's authority. Critics fear the U.S. is sliding toward war without a clear strategy. Supporters, including Senators Rubio and Cruz, defend the move as law enforcement against narco-terrorists. They argue Maduro's regime is a criminal enterprise, and seizing assets disrupts drug trafficking. The debate reveals deep divisions over U.S. policy toward Venezuela. Some want pressure and containment, others demand maximum force. The outcome of this battle will shape America's next steps. The stakes are not just international, they're political and deeply personal at home. The skipper's seizure has pushed Venezuela's crisis into a new, unpredictable phase. If the U.S. continues intercepting oil shipments, Maduro's government could face collapse, or become even more repressive. The suffering of ordinary Venezuelans is likely to deepen. The U.S. naval buildup has created a volatile environment in the Caribbean, worrying neighboring countries. Latin American leaders oppose military intervention, preferring dialogue over force. The global oil market faces new uncertainty as risks and costs rise. The shadow fleet's future is in doubt, and companies must rethink their strategies. The next moves by Washington, Caracas, and their allies will determine the region's fate. Will this pressure bring change, or only more hardship? The world waits, as Venezuela's future hangs in the balance.